just because and trying to prove a point because they hearing, oh man, old boy Suge, he a.
And I'll never forget when Buntry slapped out of Suge, right?
Suge Money was an influence for all of those guys and everybody to come in. So without the money, you're nobody. You just Suge Knight. Lived in the hood. Never gangbang, never did nothing.
When people think about Suge Knight, a lot of them see him as one of the most dangerous guys on the planet. It's not just because of his massive size, which is already pretty intimidating, but more because he had this knack for surrounding himself with some serious deadly dudes. These guys were which made Suge's power and influence all the more potent because he knew exactly how to use them to manipulate others. But some folks think he wasn't as much of a mastermind as he's made out to be. Take that quote he gave to the LA Times about the gang wars involving Death Row Records. This feud that is going on has nothing to do with me. I was in prison. Statements like this make people wonder if he was just an average guy who got caught up with some really volatile characters. A lot of fans believe that without his tough entourage, Suge wouldn't have been able to pull off half of what he did. So who were these guys that had his back? Let's dive into the infamous entourage that made Death Row Records what it was.
All these big old Piru left his backside. What happened? He started getting knocked out, started testing him. Now you see the.
Suge Knight's crew was made up of dudes who were around Death Row a lot. You'd find them in the offices, at the studio recordings, and definitely at Suge's notorious Red Room meetings. These guys were mainly members of the Mob Piru, a notorious Bloods gang. The Piru Street Boys were founded by Sylvester Scott and Vincent Owens back in '69. Initially, they were associated with the Crips, but that alliance didn't last. By 1972, the Piru Street Boys had teamed up with other smaller gangs like the Brims, Bishops, and Denver Lanes, who were also against the Crips. The coalition became known as the Bloods, and they started calling each other Blood. Over the years, more Blood sets formed, including the Mob Piru Bloods, which Suge Knight became affiliated with. He ended up hiring many Mob Piru members to work at Death Row. Some sources say Suge wasn't actually a member himself, he just ran the show at the label.
Paid people to do certain things. Didn't make him a leader of the Mob Piru. Suge Money was an influence for all of those guys and everybody to come in. So without the money, you're nobody. You just Suge Knight. Lived in the hood. Never gangbang, never did nothing.
So who were these key players in Suge's entourage? There were guys like Jake Big Jake Robles, Trayvon Traylane Lane, Alton Buntry McDonald, Aaron Heron Palmer, Henry Hendog Smith, Big Rock, and Neckbone. Everyone except Big Rock and Heron, who were from the Elm Street Pyro and Looters Park, respectively, were Mob Pirus. These members had different roles at the label. Neckbone was managing some artists, and Big Jake and Hendog were climbing up the ranks. Big Jake was really into the music scene and was quickly becoming a student of the game. Hendog, on the other hand, was the creative mind behind the iconic Death Row logo, overseeing the art department. Other notable associates included K-Dub and James McDonald, Buntry's brother. These two did security at events and were around the label here and there, but they weren't as consistently present as the others. Suge put James in charge of his new venture, Let Me Ride Hydraulics, which he opened in '94, with about 15 employees from the neighborhood. Lip Dog and Timmy Rue, another of Buntry's brothers, were also around, though Timmy only showed up after Buntry passed away. Then there were Rick James, Bob Gotti, George G. Williams, or Ponytail as Suge called him, and Poochie. These last two were crucial parts of Suge's hit squad. They were given cars and would be called in by Suge for special jobs, like when Poochie allegedly killed Biggie Smalls in '97. To get a sense of just how dangerous these guys were, let's look at Aaron Heron Palmer. Born on October 8, 1962 in Compton, California, Heron, also known as Goldie, grew up on the east side of Compton in what would become Mob Piru territory. Standing at 5'9" and athletically built, Heron was always a ladies' man, known for stealing other guys' girls and beating up the guys afterward. In late 1978, he went to prison for armed robbery, and by the time he got out, he was even more jacked. Heron was already causing trouble on the streets before the Crip and Blood gang banging fully took off. He was a loud talker who could back up everything he said, earning a reputation as a wild and crazy dude in Compton. When he wasn't in and out of jail, Heron was robbing and selling drugs to make money. He didn't mind getting his hands dirty. By the late 80s, he was a beast in Compton, someone who wouldn't hesitate to knock you out or pull the trigger. He's alleged to have committed multiple murders during this time. His rage found a new direction when he got involved with Suge and Death Row.
I ain't never had a job before in my life until I started working for Suge. You know, in and out of jail, you know what I'm saying? Did a little bit of everything.
Suge Knight's Death Row Records allegedly got its start with $1.5 million in drug money, a hefty chunk of which came from Kingpin Michael Harris and his wife Lydia. What began with that investment turned into a juggernaut in the music industry, raking in hundreds of millions with a roster that boasted names like Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, Tupac, and even for a brief but surprising stint, MC Hammer. Heron Palmer was a crucial player during Death Row's heyday. Officially, he was on the security detail, but everyone in the know understood that was just a front. Heron was part of the muscle behind Death Row. He wasn't just a bodyguard, he was a hitman, a stone-cold enforcer. He liked to call himself Mr. 17, claiming he had 17 bodies to his name. His preferred method was ambushing his targets and unloading on their cars while they were still inside. Heron's violent streak was legendary. For example, there was an incident where he got into a car-to-car shootout with some Crips on Launch Boulevard. Heron's barrage of bullets left the Crips' car riddled with holes, causing it to crash into a pole. Only one person survived that carnage, but there was another side to Heron. To his family and friends, he was fiercely loyal and always looked out for his people. He was loved by his set and his crew at Death Row. Heron officially hailed from the Looters Park Piru, but he was so tight with the Mob Piru that both sets claimed him. Working at Death Row exposed him to all sorts of people in the industry. He even dated Left Eye from TLC for a while and lent his voice to some projects like doing a voiceover for Snoop Dogg's Was the Case and a skit on Lady of Rage's album. Heron was especially close to Tupac. There was this one time when Tupac and Heron went to a store and some Crips started hassling Tupac, asking him where he was from. Tupac, ever the fighter, stood his ground and repped Mob Piru. Heron then walked out of the store and the sight of him was enough to send the Crips running. Tupac respected Heron a lot and even mentioned him in a few songs, most notably in To Live and Die in LA, where he gave shoutouts to his close crew. Heron was there with Tupac during the infamous altercation with Orlando Anderson at the MGM Grand Casino. When Tupac punched Orlando, Heron jumped in to help with the beatdown, but Tupac attacking Orlando, aka Baby Lane, was a huge mistake. Orlando was a known hitter for the Southside Compton Crips and was under investigation for several at the time, including those of Demon Long and Elber Webb Jr. It wasn't shocking that Baby Lane retaliated that same night. Tupac was shot 4 times, and while everyone else partied at Club 662, Heron was the only one who went to the hospital and stayed with Tupac. When Tupac died 6 days later, Heron took it really hard and was dead set on getting revenge. After Tupac's death, Heron got close with Napoleon, another Death Row affiliate. Heron showed Napoleon around the gritty parts of Compton and the surrounding areas. Napoleon, fascinated by the streets, soaked up all the stories and lessons Heron had to share. Heron had strong ties in Inglewood too. One day, Risky, the artist behind the album covers for Tupac and the Outlaws, called Heron in a panic. He was in trouble with some Crips. Heron and Napoleon sped over the valley, hopped out of their car with guns drawn, and confronted the Crips. The moment the Crips saw Heron, they backed off immediately, not wanting any problems with him. In Heron's final days, things at Death Row Records were far from stable. Rumor had it that Suge Knight wasn't paying him, but Heron stayed loyal regardless. The whole Death Row crew started turning on each other. Heron and George E. Williams, both Death Row associates and from the same gang, eventually had a falling out. This all came to a head on June 1st, 1997. That Sunday, there was a Death Row and Piru picnic at Gonzales Park in Compton. Leading up to this, George Williams had been spreading rumors that Heron had shot him and tried to kill him. Heron was at the park just playing football when he got a page and decided to leave. A witness saw Poochie, Roderick, George, and his girlfriend Woozy, who was dressed as a man that day, follow Heron as he left the park. Heron was dropped at a red light, stuck in traffic, when Woozy and Roderick jumped out at the main intersection armed with automatic weapons. They opened fire, hitting Heron 13 times. He died right there at the scene. This brazen attack happened in broad daylight in front of numerous witnesses, including a fire department truck that was 2 cars behind. Only Roderick was convicted of Heron's murder, but many believe that Woozy, George's girlfriend, was the one who fired the fatal shots. Heron left behind his children and family. Fast forward to January 19th, 2014, Heron's son Christopher was on his way home from high school track practice when he got caught in the middle of a shootout between 2 warring Mexican gangs. A stray bullet struck Christopher in the head. When police arrived, they found him lying in the grass in front of a residence. He was put on life support for 3 days before they pulled the plug. Christopher was just 17 years old. Next up is Alton Buntry McDonald. Buntry was a well-respected member of the Mob Pirus, one of the 3 blood sets connected to Suge Knight and Death Row Records. In an interview, his older brother Mob James talked about how he felt the need to split from Death Row.
You're taught to destroy. And that's all I want.
But his younger brother, recently out of jail, almost took over the same role at death row that James had. Despite being from the same set of Mob Pirus, Buntry found himself running with a more aggressive group. The younger generation had a more reckless, nothing-to-lose attitude. Buntry's life and ultimately his death seemed to be a case of getting caught in the middle of two things. One was the firing of George Williams, often referred to online as G or Ponytail. The other was a mysterious videotape surrounding the April 27, 2000 death of Vance V. Buchanan. This tape allegedly showed the kidnapping, torture, and eventual murder of Buchanan. Buntry's connection to the tape was that it was supposedly played at his house for an audience. And when we say supposedly, it's because everyone involved in that situation seemed to end up dead.
Vincent Buchanan, who was V-Dog, he got in Compton, tortured, dropped off, handcuffed.
This led to the March 25, 2001 of David Brim Dave Dudley. Dudley and his girlfriend were reportedly followed to Buntry's house where they were shot multiple times. When we say multiple, we mean upwards of 10 shots, resulting in the death of 29-year-old Dudley and allegedly the decapitation of his girlfriend's arm. Many believe this was a message to Buntry, not just because Brim Dave was a friend of Buntry's, but also because of where it took place, right outside Buntry's house.
David Brim in front of Buntry house. That was a message. They followed him over there, him, shot his girlfriend. She still don't have an arm.
By this time, death row was almost in shambles. Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg had left the label, Tupac had been in Las Vegas, and Suge Knight found himself behind bars. But on August 3, 2002, Buntry was at a gas station in Compton. According to the LA Times, he paid the gas attendant, and as he stepped out to pump gas, a vehicle pulled up beside him and opened fire, hitting him 4 times in the chest. The vehicle he was in was said to be registered to death row with Reggie Wright Jr.'s name on the title.
But they still believe it. And they've been at the Buntry ever since. And they Buntry.
This led to speculation that Reggie Wright Sr. was in the vehicle with Buntry, an accusation he refuted in several interviews. He insisted his son Reggie Wright Jr. was actually trying to get the vehicle back from Buntry.
I lost my brother to pyrus, and I was a pyru every day I walked out the door.
Then we have Pooie, the infamous hitman for Suge Knight and the alleged real killer of Biggie Smalls. Born in Louisville, Kentucky, his real name was Wardell Foose, and he grew up with his mom, Mary Alice Foose, and his dad, Wardell Jones. Pooie also went by Wardell Jones Jr. at times. In the early 70s, he moved to Compton, California with his family. They settled on Bradfield Street in East Compton, but Pooie also spent some time living in San Bernardino. One night between 6 and 7 p.m. on February 11, 1975, when Pooie was just 14 years old, he got into a fight and got his ass kicked. Determined to get revenge, he came back with a gun and his stepfather and shot up a house on South Harris Avenue in Compton. Fast forward to the mid to late 80s and Pooie was getting into more trouble. Reggie Wright Jr., who was working as a Compton police officer back then, arrested Pooie for having an Uzi, some and using a fake name. Pooie had apparently wanted to shoot someone who had done something to his sister. In the late 80s, Pooie OG Stoney from Elm Street Piru over drugs. He walked right up to him, who was with some other people at the time, and shot him in the head point blank. Pooie, along with his stepbrother Floyd Boyd, was also involved in a brutal home invasion. They broke into the house of Paris Eugene Reeves in San Bernardino, tied up Reeves and his girlfriend, taped their mouths shut, and beat Reeves before shooting him multiple times. His girlfriend was shot in the head and left for dead. Suge Knight met Pooie through George Williams, and during the death row days, Pooie Knob and George were tight. Unlike other gang members, Pooie didn't hang out much at the death row studio. He preferred places like the Let Me Ride hydraulic shop. He and Jew would get paid for what they did for Suge, sometimes receiving cars as rewards. People who knew Pooie said he was super laid back and cool around his friends, but awkward in public. In 1995, Suge Knight found himself threatened by William Ratcliffe from the Bounty Hunters. Ratcliffe was pestering Suge for a recording contract with Death Row Records, even cornering Suge in a bathroom during a video shoot with 10 other bounty hunters, demanding to be signed. Suge, who had a low tolerance for harassment, told anyone who would listen that Ratcliffe's days were numbered. Suge called Pooie and told him get rat. The very next day, Ratcliffe was gunned down on Central Avenue in Compton. After Tupac died, a war between the Bloods and Crips broke out, but Pooie stayed out of it. He had met Tupac before and thought he was a loudmouth, not a fan of rappers in general. In February '97, Suge Knight was sentenced to 9 years for a probation violation. Suge's baby mama, Teresa Swan, posed as the secretary for Suge's lawyer, David Kenner, to help Suge communicate from prison. Suge, emotional and enraged, told Teresa that he wanted Notorious B.I.G. and told her to contact Poochie. Teresa and Poochie met at Denny's in Lakewood, where Poochie asked for $9,000 to carry out the hit. A couple of weeks after Biggie's Poochie came back and asked Teresa for another $4,000 to get out of town. In the summer of '99, Poochie and his best friend William Chin Walker were picking up Chin's nephew when Puff Daddy's song I'll Be Missing You started playing. They both laughed and Poochie joked, "Ish, I should have got some royalties off that song." A year later, on April 4th, 2000, Poochie and Chin were parked on North Madison Avenue, a dead-end street in Compton. Just after midnight, two men rushed up, opened fire, and fled. Chin, in the driver's seat, died and Poochie ended up seriously injured, spending a couple of months in a wheelchair. He refused to cooperate with the police. The shooters were believed to be Vince Buchanan, aka V-Dog, and Jerome Snake Jordan, possibly targeting Poochie for stealing drugs from Lil Rod. Poochie knew G was on Lil Rod's side. After Poochie recovered, Lil Rod and Snake allegedly were picked up Poochie and Eric Walker, Chin's brother. They were on Highway 91 when they were ambushed and shot several times with an AK-47. Lil Rod survived, but Snake died. On July 24th, 2003, at the age of 43, Poochie was while riding his motorcycle through Compton on Central Avenue. He was shot 10 times in the back and was buried at Inglewood Park Cemetery. George Williams and Lil Rod are believed to be the shooters. Then we have George Williams, and let me tell you, this guy is crucial to the whole story because every death we've talked about so far seems to be linked back to him. George was one of Suge Knight's security guys, but things took a dark turn when he turned against Suge and pretty much started targeting members of the Piru gang. It all began when George noticed Suge's clear favoritism towards Poochie. Poochie was getting houses and expensive gifts for the he committed, while George felt he was getting crumbs and the short end of the stick. This led to a lot of built-up animosity, which finally boiled over into a heated argument between Suge and George. Some say George was stealing money from Suge, and when Suge found out, he fired him and demanded that George return all the gifts and cars he had given him over the years. However, other people close to George claim he was set up and made to be the fall guy. Whichever story is true, George refused to return any of the gifts. He felt he had earned them for all the dirty work he had done for Suge over the years. Suge was livid when he found out George wasn't going to give back the car. Some even say Suge feared George, so he thought it best to get George out of the way. But this move ended up backfiring in the worst way. Suge allegedly put a hit out on George. One day, Suge's goons lured George to a secret location where they gave him a severe beatdown. They tortured him, and Heron even shot George in the They were about to kill him, but somehow George managed to escape. George went into hiding after that, but he started recruiting other Piru members to fight against Suge and his crew, mainly including members from Froudtown and Looters Park. George retaliated by having Heron. He then switched sides against Suge and became an enforcer for Lil Rod from Froudtown, Piru. Lil Rod had evolved into a powerful PCP dealer across the country, and after linking up with George, they faced a large amount of drugs being stolen. The robbery involved Poochie and his friend William, which resulted in William's death, with Poochie barely escaping. Then there was the death of Vance, who was Lil Rod's best friend. The death was allegedly videotaped and Buntry played the tape for friends. This enraged George and Lil Rod, leading to Buntry's death.
Situation with Buntry, you said that George killed him?
Yeah,
And George was a Piru also?
yeah.
George continued his spree of Piru members, taking out Hendog, the man behind the Death Row logo. George's spree was eventually cut short when he and Lil Rod were convicted of manufacturing and distributing PCP and conspiracy to distribute the drugs. During a 2003 raid on their operation, drug agents recovered 175 kilograms of PCP, 50 weapons, and $175,000 in cash. In 2021, George was released from prison. Currently, he's out on parole and keeping a low profile. At the end of the day, people are saying that Suge Knight was the reason for the downfall of the once powerful Death Row Records. By affiliating himself with these dangerous people, he set off a chain of events that didn't end well for anyone involved. Most of them are either dead or rotting away in prison, including Suge Knight himself. The empire that once housed some of the biggest names in Hollywood crumbled because of these affiliations, and it's a stark reminder of how dangerous the game really is.